I tried to make a website look better. Website design is the art of making a page look good so that people can actually figure out what the hell it's about. But for whatever reason, instead of hiring a front-end graphics designer, businesses and clients often hand over the responsibility of creating a website design over to developers. And us developers just aren't really good at making good user interfaces and good user experiences. Sure, we can make the functionality work. If we're handed a good design, we can replicate it. But sometimes the nuances of creating good UX and good UI is just a little bit beyond us. So I decided that I'm going to teach design to developers. It's one of the things that's important to me, and it's helped me get a better job, earn more money, and hopefully it can help you guys too. Okay, so the design we're looking at today is from Milton Chung. He's put together a portfolio, and we're going to have a look at what's good and what's bad and how we can improve it to make it look a little bit better. The very first thing here we've done is pull it into Figma. I've actually created two designs here, which will be a before and after, which we can check out, but for the time being, let's have a look at this one here. In terms of Figma, it allows us to move around some of these elements to see what we can do to make it a little bit more interesting. We're going to start off here with the header, which we have a few bits of information. We've got the menu on the top right here, and we've got the main section here, which is an introduction to himself, which is pretty good. In terms of the content here, we also have a background image. Now, the very first point I want to make here is that if you're making a website and you're trying to create a portfolio for yourself or something like that, one of the most important things is the hero image that you're picking out. It really has to provide some sort of context. If we take a look at this image right here, what kind of context do you feel like you're getting? You've got some mountains, you've got a bit of a different contrast here with some text, and you've got some cloud in the background. If you were to remove all the text from this image and you just try to get the feeling on the mood of this text, this seems like someone who is maybe exploring, maybe someone who is going out and about. It doesn't give me that sense that this is a developer. There's lots of images we could use here into this design to sort of reinforce that element of this is a developer, this is a front-end developer. We could use maybe some images of code. We could maybe use some images of a person working on a laptop, even maybe a picture of himself too. So these are different ways we can have a look at images. So let's see if we can find a good image to make this page look a little bit better. One of my favorite places for images is Unsplash. So let's jump onto that website and see if we can find a better header image. Let's head over to Unsplash and we'll select maybe programming as an image. And here we've got a few different good examples. In this case, I might pick something with a bit of programming font that we can also darken out later in the future. So maybe in this case, something like this one here, which is a good idea. Maybe this could be something of maybe the person working in the background. Then here where we grab the image, we're gonna paste this one in below it and replace it. So we'll just paste it here. Let's just resize this a little bit to make sure it fits in nicely. And as a general image, I think this provides a lot more context than what we originally had. Now that we have a nice image here, let's have a look at the actual content we have for the text. We have, "Hi, I'm Milton Chung, a front-end developer." Both of the fonts here are more or less the same. One thing that is important is sizing. Sizing defines what is the most important aspect for this page. Now, since this is a portfolio page, I'm going to probably say that the name is more important. Because of that, I'm going to say we should increase the size of it. So I'm going to almost double the font size here. I might make it also a little bit more bold, so it definitely sticks out. And we could even center this, but since we've got most things left aligned, we'll keep this left aligned for the time being. We also have this second line here, which I'm just going to increase a little bit so it's not too small compared to the other piece of text. And then finally, the last section here is these two buttons. And right now, because these two buttons actually sort of almost blend in with the background, I might actually remove them. So instead of having portfolio and contact, I'll remove portfolio. And for contact, instead of having this outline, which doesn't really define it that clearly, I'll remove this stroke and I'll actually do a fill. And for the fill, I'll actually do that blue so that it stands out a little bit more, make it a little bit bigger, and make the text here a little bit bigger too. Ideally, one call to action on the home page is best, because that way it forces the person to really engage with that action point, and essentially they're more likely to click it. So here we've just made the text a little bit bigger, the button a little bit bigger, and just reduced 2 buttons down to 1 button, and already I think this gives a much more clear indication of what we're trying to get the person to do, which is literally to contact them. One other aspect that really makes pages stand out is color. Right now, a lot of these colors on the home page are sort of muted. We've got very toned grays and shades, and without too much of these, we're losing out on some of the life we can apply to this page. So here's without the background color, here's with the background color. You can see that there's quite a bit of a difference. What I'm going to do is change this to a linear gradient. And for the linear gradient, we'll set the very first color maybe as that strong blue, and then the secondary color also as the strong blue, but with less opacity, maybe almost 0% opacity. And we can play around with this bit by bit until it's got a nice feel and look. So I think the other color on this page is this dark blue, so maybe we can use that, and this gives a little bit more life to that home page. Or alternatively, sometimes what we can do is we can play with other colors entirely. So this one here is more of a purple, and if we apply this without too much shade, we can tone it from the blue color to the purple color, maybe a slightly darker tint of that. And instead of this color being blue, we'll set it to white, and that way that can stand out a little bit more. So if we take a look at this design now back to back, we can see the one here on the left sort of a little bit more bland, a little bit lacking in color and definition in terms of the picture, whereas now it's a little bit more vibrant. We've got a little bit more context with the image as well as the text standing out a little bit more too. So all up, I think that's enough changes for the header. The only other item here is I would maybe move these menu items here to be more in line with the outer content of this page, because right now we start off the high here as a container almost, rather than from the very left, so we should do the same here for the menu. We can move on to the next section now that we're done more or less with this header. Let's go to the next section here, which is the About Me section. There's a few things we can do here to clean this up. First of all, this paragraph is way too big, and it's a little bit overwhelming. Normally, I wouldn't have too much in terms of lines per paragraph, so I'd space this out a little bit, or make it smaller in general. This should also have a little bit more padding, so I'm going to make this whole section move up a tiny bit so that we can fit it all in. There should be a little bit more padding here on the right, or we can shrink down the text a little bit too. For this button, let's keep it consistent with the button in the header. So I'm going to remove the outline, and I'm just going to do a fill of a white color, and we'll change the text color inside to be that blue color. So let's do that now. And finally, the image here looks already pretty good. I don't think we have to do anything to really change it. We could make it a little bit bigger, for example, but otherwise I think this section is pretty good. We could play around with this section more, like we could say overflow it with the header, which I think that does look pretty cool. But if we're going to do that, we might need to also give it a bit of a background. So let's see if I can apply some sort of a background here on top of it as well, so that it doesn't seem too empty. Where did it go? So let's move this layer up a tiny bit. There we go, not too far above. This is the problem with Figma. Sometimes these layers can be all over the place. And let's see what color we can use to make this work. So we already have this gray that we're using in the portfolio area. So I might just use that gray and just move the portfolio up a little bit. All right, that's much better. Then we've got this next section here for the portfolio. For the portfolio, this section actually looks pretty good. So I don't really have any recommendations to change it. So I'm just going to move it up a little bit. So it's got about the same amount of padding from the top and bottom here. So it flows nicely together. Then we can scroll down here to the My Skills section. So this section here, it's got quite a few things going on. We've got all these boxes here, and it actually feels a little bit overwhelming. My very first change would be literally to remove the boxes, because I think that they don't add as much value as you might want them to, and it just makes the whole section looks a little bit clustered. Next, I would probably only have 4 to 5 core skills, because the rest sort of imply that you might be a generalist in all but specialist in none. So if you're picking out a few, I would probably just start off here with maybe HTML, CSS, and JavaScript as 3 big ones, and then maybe the others can be a little bit smaller. So let's see if we can actually make them a little bit smaller here with the scale tool. And I might just move them down here. And we'll also add in Bootstrap and React down there. So let's rescale those. Much better. And then we might make this whole section a little bit bigger. And I think that should be a little bit better now. So now we've got this section here, skills, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, Sass, and then all the sub skills underneath. And I think that's okay. The other thing is that if we could even make this like a little slider. So these could almost just loop through and just slide across as we're viewing them. So that'd be a cool another way we could do this. So if we're gonna do that, I would say we could copy over this gray here. We could resize it a little bit. So let's actually shrink it down a little bit here. Expand it out a little bit like that, and this way all of these items here could go across that slider. Then we can move this up a tiny little bit as well, and that should be more or less it for this section. I don't know, somehow I'm still not happy with it, so I'm gonna undo all those changes, and let's see how else we could probably structure this. So this is something that you may or may not have to do with the design, which is continuously iterate over different ideas until something definitely works. In this case, we tried modifying all of these things and I still wasn't really happy with it. So I'm gonna have a look at maybe changing up these boxes and having them work a little bit different than how they're working now, just so that maybe they can stand out better. So we've got all these boxes. Now we're having the issue where they felt a little bit overwhelming. So that's because they had a border and they had a box shadow. I'm gonna remove both of those, and instead I'm just gonna do a very subtle background color. And we might use the blue, but just a tint of that blue. So this way they should still stand out here, but not as much as they were before. We could make them black, but not all the icons work with a black. So we could just do a slight gray here. Then by doing so, we could also shrink them down a tiny bit each so that the text and the icons don't feel too large and have enough padding here to have, you know, some room to breathe essentially. I'm just going to shrink them just a little bit for each one. And then we can move the text up a little bit so it sits closer to the logo. So already that line there looks much more clean than it did before. And we can do the same here for the rest of them. So let's shrink these down too. And I think that'll be a much better experience. And PM is already a pretty small one, so I'll just move him over here. Let's make Java small. Sanity, I wonder what that is. Postman, we all know what that does. We're using Figma right now. VS Code is the code text editor for heroes. SQL for all your database needs. And Python for pretty much everything else. Beautiful. Let's move this text up as well. And this one here. And I think I'm pretty happy now with this my skills section. So let's have a look at what we had before and after. So before we had all of these here. Now we've got nice blocks, and we could even make them maybe have a different color when you hover over them, or whatever you really like. But at least this section is working. Let's also move it up a tiny little bit, and then move the rest of the sections across a little bit too. Because white space is good, but too much white space can sometimes make it feel a little bit aloof. So you want to have consistent spacing and padding between each section here. Last is the Contact Me section. And to be honest, this already looks really good. So I don't really have any recommendations to change here. I think that you've got a nice SVG image here. It's got your inputs with context and labels, and you can immediately send a message, and the colors are good too, so that stands out well. So that's more or less it. Here is the before and after images. You can see that we haven't made too many changes. I usually like to only make about 5 to 10% worth of changes when I'm designing a website. But it's more just to show you what a small change can do in terms of creating a better design. So always make sure you're iterating over your designs to try and make them look better.